Welcome to the podcast where passion and purpose collide. We are on a mission to interview women and the occasional token man about how their passion and purpose have collided to create healthy relationships and profitable businesses. I am Elizabeth Denham here with Rebecca Monet. We are the co-founders of the Coterie for Women. Rebecca, you've had a big week this week, haven't you?
I sure have. First time flying since my accident and since COVID. So big deal for me.
In a lot of ways. How was it traveling with the pandemic?
You know what? It was much better than what I expected. I got to the airport and I had my mask, but it's very thin and it's kind of a whatever. And instantly they said that won't do. So they give you a mask. And so, of course, you have to wear it inside and you have to wear it on the plane. And I thought it was really interesting because once you're on the plane, I would say 50 to 70% of people only had their mouths covered. They didn't have their nose covered. And the attendants didn't say squat, which made me feel better because at least now if I'm pulling mine down, I can. You're
not going to get in trouble.
I'm not going to get in trouble because they're going to have to unload 150 people if they do that. So, but the big thing, my thorn this week about that is, of course, I hate wearing the mask as most people do. But we had some plane issues in Las Vegas. I went through Las Vegas to get to Tulsa to visit my grandchildren. And we're loaded and we're out on the runway. And all of a sudden there's some kind of plane issue, who knows what. And we're back at the gate and we're unloaded. Now, normally in normal times, if you're unloaded to get another plane could be hours and sometimes the next day. And in this case, because of COVID, there's so many airplanes that are grounded that they literally took us to another gate and we reloaded. So we were off and back on and in the air within, hour and 15 minutes.
Wow.
It was a shocker. So of course I didn't like the idea that it was another hour and a half before I got to see my grandkids and my children. But
it could have been an overnight stay on a normal day, right?
And that would not have been fun. I would have been a grumpy pants if that happened.
I know. So I know what your rose is going to be, but tell me anyway.
Yeah, my rose, of course. With COVID, it's been almost 11 months since I've seen 5 of my 6 grandchildren. The baby I saw in February, but the others I haven't had a chance to see. So naturally, I was just ecstatic to see my babies. And the kids have been just giddy since I've been here. Because we're very close. My grandkids are very
well. We Zoomed yesterday and they were all over you. I got to meet them because they didn't want to be 2 inches away from you.
No, my 3 daughters, they are like glued to my side. And then the others are older, 22 and 15. And then there's a baby that's 3. But yeah, they don't want to be apart.
That's so nice though, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's big excitement when it's been that long, and I'm sure they've changed a ton.
They have, especially the baby who's walking, of course, right? She's a year old. That's why I'm here to celebrate her birthday. So it was fun. That's my rose. You
can't beat that rose.
No. So how about you? I want to hear about your thorn, and I want to hear about your rose this week.
Well, I don't know which it is. So I'm going to let you decide. So I came out the other night. I always wear the same things to sleep, basically. And I found some pajamas that were at the bottom of the pile that my husband had never seen them when we've been married 8 years. So I thought, those are so soft and cozy and comfortable. And I walked out in them and he fell out laughing. He's like, "What are you wearing?"
Okay, I got to see this.
This is the pattern. He thought it was and it has bottoms, like tops and bottoms.
It's kind of pretty.
He was calling me Madam Butterfly. And I guess because it covers you from like shoulder to ankle.
That's so pretty.
I thought it was kind of pretty, and it's very silky soft, and summery, lightweight. And so I walked out and he laughed his butt off. And so the next morning I came out in them and my son was there and I was like,
Is this funny?
Pajamas are funny. And he said, he starts giggling. He's my quieter one. And he's just doing this low giggle. And he's like, they are pretty funny.
Oh!
He said, I thought that last night when I came home from work. And I was like,
I wonder if it's a gender thing because I think they're adorable.
I mean, they're pretty.
They're pretty. I like the swirlies and the flowers and the softness. I mean, it flows. I wonder if it's a guy thing.
I don't know. And the other day, over the weekend, I got up and took a shower and I just put them back on because I was just going to be hanging out at home. And Donald goes, why did you put those back on? I was like,
so he's suggesting that his laugh means you should never wear this thing again?
Apparently. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it is kind of a lot of pink and black and it's a little bold, maybe. I don't know.
I think it's gorgeous. It's got like a little bit of an Asian flair.
I think that's why the Madame Butterfly thing came out. But I was like, yeah. I don't know. They're very soft. I mean, you just kind of want to.
Here's what I can say about this, Elizabeth, is he's got great taste in women, bad taste in clothes.
Maybe he thinks he's got very strong opinions about women's shoes. He always has an opinion if he thinks some shoes, he doesn't love nude shoes. Just it's funny how opinionated he is, but I'm like, I think they were any big deal. And two men in my house think that they're hilarious. So
that's all right. Okay. All right. So we need to ask our audience what their opinion is. Weigh in, guys.
Yeah.
Ladies, tell us if these are cute.
Exactly. Rose or thorn pajamas.
Yes.
And keep in mind that they're very soft. I had this college roommate who had this blanket from when she was a baby, and it had a little silky border on it. Mm-hmm. And she would sit there and talk to you and rub her face with it. That's what I'm reminding myself of. Like, this is like Carrie rubbing her face. It's like her little habit from childhood.
My son had two blankets that had that soft stuff on the edges, mm-hmm. a ribbon on the edge. And he constantly was rubbing it. Half the time it was up his nose. But he had this thing about soft things. In fact, when he was a baby, he would go to my lingerie drawer and pull out the softest thing he could. And it would just drag around the house as a toddler.
Isn't that funny?
I think we put this up for vote.
I do too. So I don't know if I have a rose or a thorn or both. I'm entertained by it. That my pajamas have caused this controversy in my house. I just thought they were comfortable and I forgot they were there.
It's a discovery.
So yeah, everybody chime in, give us a comment. Thumbs up or thumbs down, rose or thorn on the PJs.
Thumbs up for me.
All right, we'll report back next week, so be sure to vote. We will see you next time on Roses and Thorns. Welcome back to Where Passion and Purpose Collide. We are here with a very special guest. I've been excited to interview her all week. She's actually going to be in the next issue of the Franchise Woman as well. So Rebecca, why don't you tell everyone who we've got today?
I think we're both just so giddy we can hardly stand, having Jane Plitt with us today. So let me give you just a little bit of background on Jane. She's a graduate of Cornell University School of Industrial and Labor Relations, which kind of set the foundation for a whole lot of her life. She was also selected in 1987 as Rochester Small Business Person of the Year, and she served in 1986 as a delegate to the White House Conference on Small Business. So we're hoping you'll talk about that also. Her writings, and she's a prolific writer, Jane, her writings have appeared in publications including the Chicago Sun-Times, Wall Street Journal, and of course, the infamous Franchising World. So Jane Plitt ran an award-winning business consulting practice until she became completely enthralled with the life of Martha Matilda Harper. So can you give us a backdrop of that? So always an activist, always an advocate, these wonderful leadership skills that you have, you're articulate, you're brave. But this story with Martha Matilda, tell us the backdrop, how you got interested, and what about the story was so fascinating to you?
Um, as I mentioned, I ran a marketing consulting firm. We were hired by a community bank in Rochester that was refurbishing the oldest, most historic office building in Rochester. And they hired our firm to help them promote the grand opening for purposes of attracting as many people as possible to the bank. And we suggested that everyone had a story linked to the Powers building. And therefore, we should create a history gallery, a Powers history gallery, and ask the community to donate whatever memorabilia, whatever records they had, and stories. And that we would showcase it. And when the building opened, we could also see this wonderful history gallery. Well, the community responded in force, and one of the items was a very small clipping that talked about a woman I'd never heard about, Martha Matilda Harper, said that she opened the first beauty shop in Rochester and was located on the 5th floor of this building, and she was the first woman member of the Chamber of Commerce.
Wow.
Oh, I thought, isn't that interesting? And I was the president of the Small Business Council of that chamber. So I just called them up and I said, hi, what do we know about the first woman member? I've never seen her portrait up in the building. I wonder what you could tell me about her. And I was told that they knew nothing. But when I found out I should share it, that absolutely is the wrong thing to say to me. So I was very determined. Given my history, it just didn't seem right. So I tried digging, and she was nowhere in Who's Who in America, Who's Who in Women. And I had another project down in Washington, D.C., had some time, went to the Library of Congress, approached a librarian and said to him, can you help me find out about this woman? I sense she's important, but I can't find a thing. Mm-hmm. He spent 2 hours with me, as I'm in love with librarians, in case you can't tell. And he couldn't find anything except a 1950 obituary on this woman in the New York Times. Now, recently the New York Times has apologized for not including many women in their obituary pages. And I knew in this obituary, it talked about how royalty around the world, US presidents were her customers, and Susan B. Anthony was a friend and customer, and how she created modern franchising. And I'm thinking, somebody should write her story, but never looking in the mirror and think it would be me. I was a businesswoman. I was not a historian at that time. But it was as though she noodled her way into my spirit and my head. And I just couldn't, I kept thinking, if it was as difficult to find out as little as I know about this woman, nobody's ever going to find this story. So why don't you do it? And I thought it would take maybe 6 months. And instead it took 6 years.
Wow.
Speaking and indicative of how little was recorded in books. But the people who had worked for her were so loyal that they had saved, and the story gets juicier and juicier. One woman with her husband went into the dumpster when the Harper Empire was sold in the 1970s, and they brought out 35 boxes of memorabilia, of photographs, all of which are now safely preserved at the Rochester Museum and Science Center. But if any of you have moved, you know that usually when you move, you dump things. Mm-hmm. These 35 boxes got moved, and they moved 5 times. Mm-hmm. So when I called Betty Wheeler and said, I'm thinking about writing a story about Martha Matilda Harper, I understand you may have some material. She said, what took you so long?
She knew that story needed to be told.
So, and
Wow.
that's how it evolved. And I'm stubborn enough, curious enough to just keep looking and going to wills and finding out relatives and calling them up out of the blue. As a business person, I'm used to people saying no, and know that you have to persist through. So that's what I did. I just kept calling, and
Wow.
it was actually quite touching. And I have an amazing relationship with those. They're called, people affiliated with the Harper are called Harperites, and they're just extraordinary. To this day, those living Harperites just treat Martha as though she was God.
Wow. She changed the lives of a lot of people. And like you said, created incredible loyalty with the women and the men too that were her customers. But bottom line, she changed lives. Can you address that a little bit? You kind of hit on modern day franchising, but can you address that a little bit?
Sure. When she opened the first beauty salon in Rochester for women, this was the Victorian era, and this was highly unusual. She had been a servant for 25 years, and she had invented a reclining shampoo chair and a cutout sink. So she knew that she had to dazzle customers on this new concept when they came in. And it worked, and there was buzz. I mean, as business people, that's what helps. So everybody wanted to bring others from out of town to show off this amazing Harper shop. And one of the people who was brought was Bertha Palmer from the Chicago Palmer House. And Bertha was a lady who was used to getting her way. And she said, Martha, I want to shop in Chicago in time for 1893 for the Chicago World's Fair.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And she was in charge of the women's pavilion. And she wanted a Harper shop there. And Martha, indicative of her boldness, said, bring back a petition with 25 of your best friends to commit that if I come, they will patronize me. So she didn't have to do any market research or the like. Bertha delivers. Now she's stuck, and she has to figure out a way to expand. In an era when she was not going to be able to get venture capital the way George Eastman did for Kodak, she wouldn't get bank financing. And she was a member of the Christian Science Church, and she looked at this church model with a strong woman, a headquarters, and satellite operations who followed her directions. And she's saying, I can do that. I can do that. And not only can I do that, I can make sure that only poor women will own my shop.
Wow.
The first 100 of her 500 worldwide shops of modern day franchising went only to these poor women. And there are very touching stories. The woman she sent to Chicago said she hadn't taken a step outside of Rochester. Not a step. She's going to Chicago. And she's the only reason I went was because Martha sent me. So that was the trust. It was also her brilliance, because at a time when you didn't have what we have today, the digital way to monitor and stay in touch with people, she had this enormously loyal cadre of women whose lives were being changed. And so they followed her dictates. And hence franchising was predictable. The Harper franchise was, the products were only manufactured by Harper. They were all organic. And she controlled the technique. And she had a training operations, 5 training operations ultimately. So it's a wonderful story of this determined woman herself who had been bound out from the time she was 7 for the next 25 years as a servant. So she deeply understood that if you were going to change poor women's lives, they needed economic empowerment, which was just what Susan B. Anthony kept lecturing her about,
Right.
that every woman needs her own pocketbook.
Indeed. And it's so interesting because franchising is all about systems and processes and customer loyalty and consistency. So this is what she created, which allowed someone, even without a business background, to step into that business model that she created, to run their own salon and be successful, even without all the high tech, advantages that we have today. She created a solid system and process and this incredible loyalty where it didn't require a whole lot of marketing. All that got taken care of. This is an absolutely brilliant woman. I already have an affinity for her. My guess is all the research you've done, it's like she's your sister now, I would think.
She's definitely with me. She was incredibly wise. And I reflect, as we're struggling now with this pandemic, that her wisdom would still be relevant because she took great pride that none of the shops in the Great Depression, none of her Harper shops were closed. And that was because she guided them through it. And she said, we need to respond to the circumstances, but not totally cut our prices. So we need to target. So what she would tell people today is you need to target a special pricing for, and probably first responders and health officials and the like. She also would have said you need to be flexible with hours given the circumstances. And so ended up working longer hours. And then she was always very sensitive to employees and said, and if you do that, then you need to give employees time off and the like. She was one of the first operations to, in essence, create childcare centers for customers. Wow. So she would probably say, and children should be able to be brought. Her concept was, if you bring young children into this shop and they are amused and happy, they are your future customers. And therefore, it was a ready flow. It was all in the family. So she would also tell people that if children need to be brought into unusual operations, that could be to your advantage. Those are the kinds of, she would also tell people that they need to persevere. They need to think outside the box. They need to have a dream. And the other part that I love about her is you need to celebrate.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just work, but she knew that people needed a sense. So every year she would have what she called a reunion, and all the people would come back. And today we know that's for training and for keeping people up to date with the latest thinking of the operation and the like. But it was also somewhat of a party. It was celebrate what we have accomplished. And we know how important that is, and acknowledging that, and not just keeping your head down, but also saying, hooray for what we've accomplished. And we can do some more.
So I wonder, when you hear these stories and you hear stories of other people who have come from nothing or come from a great struggle to overcome and do amazing things, I always want to know the story, like what made them who they are. Do you know about her family in any way that she was raised? Because sometimes I think it has to do with how you were raised and what you've learned and the taught behavior and attitudes of your family. But sometimes I think people just have a burning fire that makes them unique, because not anybody could do what she did.
That's true.
Yeah. So what did you find out about her that made you think that?
Well, there's a lot in the book, but very quickly, the trauma of being bound out. And she was sent 60 miles. She was a Canadian girl, and she was sent 60 miles away. That was like being shipped across the Atlantic Ocean. And she realized how powerless her mother was. This was an era where it all dawned on her that even if you married and you were poor, you were just another servant.
Right.
So it was very clear, even as a child, that she was not going to marry. She changed her mind. And she did observe, when she was a servant, a very successful businessman. So that was, I think, influential from an entrepreneurial possibility. But her last Canadian employer was a very kind, holistic doctor from Germany who taught her about healthy hair care. And without that, and he also had his proprietary tonic that those of you who look up Martha will see she had floor-length hair. And I believe she believed it was part of this tonic and this healthy hairstyle that was so different than what the Victorian era was, which was about stimulating the scalp and washing it and the like. He died, and on his deathbed, he bequeathed her a copy of his formula. So with that formula, she decided to emigrate to the United States, to Rochester. And as we previously discussed, Rochester, I think, was a unique, perfect community for her to come to. While she remained a servant for 6 years, she's being influenced and hearing all about suffrage and women's rights. So you're right, a lot of influences that could have been different, that all gelled. And then she had her own metal, her own sense of self. When she opened the shop, she couldn't initially get into that building. It was a very hoi polloi building. And the owner, Daniel Powers, thought it would attract trollops and prostitutes. It's a whole new concept.
Yeah.
He didn't want anything like this, especially she's a less than 5 feet tall, you know, and it's like, really? But indicative of how smart Martha was she hired an attorney. And it was the attorney who had co-represented Susan B. Anthony. And he was a former congressman, and he was also progressive. And he negotiated for her to get in on the condition, Daniel finally agreed, because you could just hear the conversation. Let her in, Danny, you know. And so Powers agrees, but he says there will be no lease. I need to be able to throw her out when I know it's not going to succeed. Well, within a month or two, it was a big success, and he approaches Martha and says, "This is just terrific, Martha, and here's a lease." And she would never sign a lease.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Stand her ground. Showed him. Okay, so we are at a point where we need to wrap up. I'm like loving this story. I'm going to have to get your book. And I know there's a bunch of people who are listening to this that are saying, where do I get this book? Where do I learn more? So how do they learn more about your book and about you? How could they be in touch?
Sure. Amazon has the book, and if I have a website, Martha Matilda Harper, .com, and they can learn more about me, more about Martha, and also find out not only about that book, but there are also books for young children and young adults, because I am, as you can see, determined that people know the Harper story at all ages.
I love it. Someday somebody's going to write a book on your life and be equally as excited and impassioned as you are about Martha Matilda. So thank you so much, Jane, for joining us. I speak for myself, and I'm sure Elizabeth feels the same. We could talk about this topic for hours and hours and hours. You're a great storyteller. Your own story is so powerful. I'm so glad you and Martha Matilda met each other and that you're getting the word out.
Me too. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm very excited to be able to tell your story to my daughters and Martha's as well. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
All right. We will be back next time with another spectacular guest. Stay tuned for more on Where Passion and Purpose Collide.
What do you think is the #1 challenge for franchisors? You got it, getting the right fit franchisee. And as you know, poor fit franchisees are often poor performers. Poor fit franchisees cost more to train and support. Poor fit franchisees are rarely satisfied or compliant, which can lead to validation issues. Not a good place to be. But now there is a solution. Zoracle Profile's scientific spot-on match program. Working with top broker groups in franchising, Zoracle has created a platform that scientifically matches the broker's candidate to the right fit franchise brand. Spot On Match predicts the compatibility, performance, and viability of a prospective franchisee. Spot On Match gives the franchise development team a data-driven and scientific approach to selling franchises. This is how it works. Zoracle works with each franchisor to establish their top performer blueprint. This research assesses current franchisees to determine the key psychographic indicators that separate high performers from mid to low performing franchisees. The final result of the research is the brand's Eclipse report, which compares prospective franchisees to a franchise system's high performers. Finally, brokers are running a spot-on profile on each of their franchise prospects. These profiles are then scientifically bumped up against the franchisor's high performer algorithms, and the match process begins. Dashboards are built for the franchisor and the broker to make sure the process is smooth and trackable. Right fit matches instantly. Find out how you can be a spot-on match member. Save time. Stop guessing. Start matching. Call Zoracle Profiles.
Welcome to Women in the Know, where we discuss everything from politics and policy to relationships and marketing. We discuss franchise growth and marketing difficulties and try to learn something that we can impart to you through our interviews with women in business and women in franchising. So today's topic is kind of a fun one, and it relates to our interview with Jane Plitt, and it's about the importance of knowing our histories. And that doesn't just mean world history, American history, your state history. They always teach that in school. Every state has a week, I think, in the 4th grade where you learn Florida history is what I learned. My kids learned Alabama history. But our history as women, and why that is something that we should all engage with and learn more about.
It's so important to pay attention to where we come from and how far we've come. And Jane Plitt kind of addressed that when she was talking about her book, which was research on Martha Matilda Harper and how Martha Matilda Harper's history got lost. It got lost primarily because she was a woman during a time where men did all the business and had rented places and built empires, and she couldn't get loans and all of those things. So learning about Martha Matilda's history kind of opens your eyes to what women before us have done to make our lives a little bit easier in the 21st century. But it's so easy to kind of get caught up in the present. And I'm one of those people personally that I'm always in the future. I'm like 10 years out, and the world is going to be this way, and my business is going to be that way, and my life is going to be the other way. I'm never looking back. But to your point, it's so important for us to look back once in a while to generations before us and things they've accomplished and things that they have overcome.
Well, it is. And part of the story of Martha Matilda is that she had a hard time getting a lease for a location. And so people today, young women, especially coming up, don't relate to that. I don't even relate to not being able to get a lease or a credit card. But my children certainly can't relate to that. And I think without knowing that, sometimes you get stuck in this rut, like things are bad or things could, be better. And you don't realize how far the progress has come. And you don't realize how hard the women before us had to work for that progress.
Yeah. I mean, think about some of our best authors years ago, Wuthering Heights, written by one of the Bronte girls, who wrote under a pen name because she knew she would not be published if she published under her own name. And then when she finally met her publisher, he was shocked that it was a woman because everything was done through the mail. So, and of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and things that she accomplished in her life. If we're not paying attention to these things, A, we're not grateful because we just take things for granted, and B, we're not really learning from it, so we don't make similar mistakes in the future to take us back rather than moving forward. As a race, right? As a human race, we all need to move forward and continue to evolve and grow and learn. And these women before us and our history should set the pace for just that.
Absolutely. And I think when you realize how many things women have done that they were not credited for, Jane Plitt talked about the cotton gin was credited to Eli Whitney, but a woman had a lot to do with that. And there are multiple stories in history where that has occurred. And, I knew a decent amount about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but there were specifics that I didn't realize. And I was less aware that she was one who fought for women to be able to have credit and fought for women to be able to get a mortgage and own things in their own names. And I read recently, here was one I really didn't know anything about. She fought for a woman in the military who got pregnant. Did you see that?
I did.
And she either had to have an abortion or quit
Get out of the military.
And she took on that case, and that helped propel women in business not to have to make that choice so that they could both be a mother and have a career. And that was a pretty big limiting factor. It was legal to fire women when they were pregnant or because they had young children at home. So I didn't realize how instrumental she was in that specifically, and I think it's critically important to understand that. And I think we still have some progress that can be made in terms of family leave and maternity leave and paternity leave and things like that could be better in terms of helping people get support during those times. But if we don't know where it had started, we wouldn't know where to go, or we would make the same mistakes over and over again. So when RBG died, I went back and watched the documentary because I had not ever taken.
Yeah, I saw it a couple of years ago.
And it was so good and informative. And it's just about the strength of a woman, and it's inspiring. For someone to have been the only female in her law school class and the things that she had to encounter. It's really a great story. And I think that's why we get excited about Jane Plitt talking about Martha Matilda, because if she hadn't done all that work, she spent a decade or more, maybe it was 2 decades, researching and digging, and it took effort. It didn't just fall into her lap to find the story of this woman who was instrumental in changing franchising. So I think it's fun if you humanize these stories,
It is fun. So I think it's important for all of us as women to look at the lives and the struggles and the obstacles and the learning that generations before us have, including our own parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, because that DNA gets passed, right? Those belief systems, those values get passed from generation to generation. So it's good to know your own personal history as well as the society you're in and the industry you're in and what's going on that makes who we are today. I looked at my personal history some time back, and I look at some of the patterns that are repeating in the women in my life, you know, some patterns that are going 5 generations, good ones as well as not so good ones.
Yeah.
Some of which I say the buck stops here, this pattern's not continuing any further. And others that I'm proud of, that, you know, my great grandmother, you know, was a landlord in a time when it was impossible to be a landlord as a woman, right? So, and had a business, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this was in 1880, 1890, 1900, you know, destroying barriers. And so a trailblazer.
So you come from good stock.
I come from good stock. Okay, ladies, gentlemen, know your history. That's right.
Lesson for the day.
Lesson for the day. Know your history, appreciate your history, learn from your history, change it if necessary into the future, but, you know, at least know where you come from. For now, we're going to close out this session of Women in the Know, and we'll see you next week on another Women in the Know.
The Franchise Woman is a bi-monthly digital magazine that empowers women as they navigate the franchising industry by providing relevant news, tools, advice, and inspiration. We are a resource for women who are seeking to own their own businesses, improve their existing businesses, find creative solutions, and take advantage of franchise opportunities. We feature women in the business who best exemplify our ideals and have something to teach our readers. In addition to our exclusive articles relating to the female entrepreneur, we also feature brands that are geared for women. Women have become the fastest growing sector in business ownership and have become a powerful, influenceable force fueling the economy. The Franchise Woman will give you the news that is relevant to you to help you navigate the path of successful franchise ownership. By women, for women, and about women. We are the Franchise Woman. Join us today at www.thefranchisewoman.com.
Welcome to Ask Beck and Liz, where no topic is off limits. We want to answer your questions about business, life, and everything in between. If you have a question for us, send it to ask@beckandliz.com. That's ask@beckandliz.com. Whew. So, Elizabeth, the question I have for us today is a lesson that we have learned from a woman in our life. Do you have a particular lesson you've learned from someone in your life, an author, a friend, a mentor, whatever?
I do. And I have several women that I could mention, but I'm going to talk about this one, and it's a little heavy. But it was such a good lesson for me and for some of my children. Jake, who's 22, when he was in the 7th or 8th grade, his best friend was William, and William's dad got diagnosed with colon cancer. And when they found it, it was very far along. So they gave him 6 months to live. I think he lived to about 18. And watching them go through that, was really remarkable to me. They handled it. He lived every ounce of life he could live. While he was feeling well, they traveled. I think they did an Alaskan cruise. They visited family. They did all of the things that they could fit in for the end of his life, knowing that that was coming, and lived hard. You know, they just squeezed it, every little bit out of it. And the day that he died, I'll never forget it. It was, I think it might've been Easter or right around there. She put something on Facebook, and we had all known it was coming. And I went and told Jake, and you know, he's an awkward middle schooler at that time. And he's like, what do I do? And I said, you call William and you say, do you need me?
Yeah.
And you see what he says. And so he did. William said, yes. So I took Jake over there, and, you know, they got through all that. And they had a genetic thing. There's a syndrome, which I can't remember the name of it, but if you have this syndrome, you will get colon cancer. It is a guarantee.
Wow.
So they had both boys tested for the gene. William had an older brother who was in high school. They both have the gene. The average life expectancy, if you don't find out about the gene, is 42. And the dad was in his mid 40s. If you find out about it, you can prolong your life by, screenings and monitoring. And so the next year, William had a big tumor removed from his abdomen. He's had several little things that they've had to keep an eye on. And his mom told me one time, I will probably bury both of my children.
Wow.
And she remarried with very, very quickly after that. And at first I thought, wow, that was kind of quick. And then I thought, she married a man from she's in Pensacola and I'm in Spanish Fort, which is about an hour away from here. And so they would come by every now and then, and he's a pastor or in that realm. I don't know that he doesn't have a church, but that was his vocation. And he is the nicest man you would ever meet. And I thought, she is continuing to squeeze life, every ounce of her life out of her life. And how lucky is she that she has someone to go through these things with her. And the boys seem to do well, seem to be pretty positive. They can't have children because the likelihood of the gene being passed is high.
Yeah.
In each generation, the disease gets more severe. So watching them and the grace that she has had and the faith that she has had, if anybody can walk through life with a smile on their face, and I don't talk to her very much. We're not that close. We're friendly, but we don't run in the same circles. But I watch her on Facebook and she's happy. She's posting these things. And I don't believe it's just Facebook happiness. I believe that she has learned to squeeze the joy out of a life that's got to be very, very, very challenging for anyone. And she's held on to her faith and she's held on to her joy, and she's found happiness with another wonderful man who can be with her as she has to navigate whatever comes next. So to me, anytime I feel like something is too much or I'm overwhelmed with whatever stress, emotion, I think of her a lot, because if I could do life with half the grace that she has, I think I will have been successful at it.
Grace and courage and embracing whatever is being thrown at her, because even with her husband who was dying, she embraced that moment. She lived in the present 100% to the fullness with her husband and with her children. And then as life changed, there was a transition. She's now embracing fully what she has, knowing she's buried her husband and likely will bury both of her children. Wow, what a wonderful lesson you learned.
It's a good one. I lean on it frequently.
Yeah.
She probably has no idea I think of her that much.
No.
But I just think that she's been inspiring. And to have faith when you know all of these things are probable. And I mean, she's still got things she's got to deal with, and the worry of having to constantly monitor and make sure that your children are okay as long as they can be. So
faith is so powerful, isn't it? It can get us through so many horrible things. And it clearly, she's mastered this idea.
She really has. So tell me about who you have learned a lesson from.
So I have had a woman in my life. Her name was Yvonne. And Yvonne was this feisty, mouthy, creative woman that was like a second mother to me. And she lived here in San Diego. And anytime I would go on a trip, she would beg to go with me. And she just had this just effervescence about her. She was just lighthearted and playful and creative and endlessly curious. She always wanted to be learning things. In fact, when I would take her places, people would say, "How old are you?" Because she looked so young and her attitude was so young. And she would frequently say, the reason she was so full of youthfulness was because of her endless curiosity. But the biggest lesson I learned from her was she married a guy that I thought was a turkey. Her first husband was
probably putting it nicely, right?
Yeah, he was a turd, really.
Turd.
But nonetheless, he was not nice. And she had a home in Las Vegas and a home here in San Diego, and they would split their time. And they happened to be in Vegas, and I went to visit them in Vegas, and the husband was driving in downtown Las Vegas, and he ended up making a turn and going up a down street, a one-way street, and he's going the wrong way. And this traffic is like crazy coming toward him. And I'm thinking, I'm in the back seat, right? And I'm thinking, I'm going to die. We're going to die right here with all this traffic. You know what traffic's like in Las Vegas?
Yeah.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a scary place to drive.
It's scary. And Yvonne, my friend, she's just calm and cool and collected, sitting in the front. She doesn't say a peep. Her husband, on the other hand, is swearing and yelling and going on about how stupid these engineers are in Las Vegas and the way they designed these roads.
Dare they design the road that way?
The signing
Want to go the other way?
exactly. You know, the signs are stupid, people are stupid, society is stupid, but mostly those engineers are ridiculous. They shouldn't have done it this way. He's carrying on like a maniac, and every part of me is going, he's going to kill us. He's so mad that is he even paying attention to? He could do a U-turn here, and he could do a right. He needs to get off the road.
Right. Turn somewhere.
Whatever it takes.
We're going in the right direction.
Exactly. So anyway, suffice it to say, I survived, they survived, all was good. And then later I had this conversation with Yvonne, and I said, Yvonne, didn't that rattle you? And shouldn't you have said something
Yeah.
to your husband? And she only said one thing to me. She says, I've learned to pick my fights. In her mind, he had already made the error.
Mm-hmm.
Correcting him or critiquing him at this point was of no value. It was futile. So she had to know that she could trust him to correct his own mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that took a lot of faith, in her husband, which was another lesson all by itself.
Mm-hmm.
But it also took knowing when to speak up and when to give feedback and when to say, okay, a mistake has been made. It's not going to help with me putting my 2 cents in, to pick our battles in life. Is this good use of time? Is this good use of my words, my energy? And she had a way of calculating that in almost everything with this, what I call a turkey of a husband. But valuable lesson for me, Elizabeth. It was just a valuable lesson.
And I think it's one we can all learn from. I mean, sometimes things are frustrating. And as I have said before, that's my worst feeling. I hate to be frustrated.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody loves it, but I have a particular aversion. And so I think sometimes when you're frustrated or worried, like you were scared, you're lashing out for the sake of lashing out because there's not anything that it's going to solve.
Exactly.
If your 2-year-old's about to run into the street and you scream, stop,
Different story.
Before it happens.
Yeah.
But if they've already gone into the street and gotten hit, you're not going to fuss at them at that point. I mean, what's done is done.
No.
Terrible example.
That's a terrible example. That's terrible.
But I think it's a great lesson. And is this valuable to our relationship and to my own mental health and to his mental health and to your
She learned.
Can you imagine if they had started going at it in the car? I mean, that might have made it worse.
It would have made it worse. She knew this was not a situation for her to speak up. Now, she was at that time 76 and I was probably 41 or something like that. So this age and this wisdom that came, having spent many years married, she just knew this was not the time to say anything.
Yeah.
The problem would resolve itself. Do not pick a fight right now.
Probably that's why she was still married to him.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Oh my gosh, we're so good at solving problems.
I know.
For now, guys, thank you for joining us today, where passion and purpose collide, profits are made, and relationships are forged. This is Beck and Liz signing off and wishing you another purpose-filled and profitable week.